Have you ever invited someone over for something as simple as tea, only for the afternoon to turn into a moment that stays with you forever? That's exactly what happened to me. Even now, my hands tremble as I think back to that day. Which city are you in while you listen to my story? It's always comforting to picture the faces behind the names, scattered across towns, tuning in to hear a piece of my life. It was a cool spring afternoon in our quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun was hidden behind a soft blanket of clouds, casting a silver light over my garden. At 57, I had learned to appreciate the little rituals. Watering the roses, adjusting the cushions on the porch chairs, making sure the table was set just right. That day, I prepared a tray with 2 cups, a pot of chamomile tea, and a plate of homemade lemon cookies. Simple comforts, nothing out of the ordinary. My son's friend Ryan had been helping me with some heavy lifting earlier that week. He's 26, polite, with a calm demeanor. There was something about him that reminded me of my own son before he moved away. Open, curious, yet carrying something unspoken. After I texted Ryan to thank him for his help, I suggested tea as a small token of my appreciation. He accepted almost too eagerly and said he'd stop by that afternoon. I watched as Ryan walked up the garden path, his steps measured, hands jammed deep in his jacket pockets, his head slightly lowered as if the magnolia trees lining the way held some secret. I greeted him with a smile, trying to ease his tension. His eyes flickered up and returned the smile, though there was a subtle tremor at the corner of his mouth. We sat on the porch, the cushions warm from the sun. The teapot hissed softly as I poured, steam rising like pale silk between us. Ryan cupped his hands around the mug, but didn't drink immediately. His eyes drifted over the garden, over the old wooden swing, the beds of tulips, and then met mine, steady and searching. I tried to keep the mood light. "You've been quiet today," I said. "Everything okay?" He inhaled deeply, then exhaled. "I didn't come just for tea," he said, his voice low but clear. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you, something I didn't know how to say." The words hung between us as delicate and heavy as the steam rising from the pot. My pulse quickened. I wasn't sure what to expect. An apology, a problem, maybe some trouble he was in. I folded my hands in my lap and nodded for him to continue, trying to remain calm. "I respect you," he started, "more than you probably realize. You've been a kind of anchor for me these past months." His fingers tightened around the cup. "I don't have a lot of people to talk to who actually listen. You've been that person for me." I felt a wave of warmth and sadness roll through me. In his eyes, I saw a young man caught between worlds, desperate to be heard, to be seen. "Ryan," I said softly, "I had no idea you felt that way. I'm glad you feel comfortable talking to me." He gave a small, odd laugh. "It's more than that," he said. "I didn't know how to tell you because I didn't want to disrespect you or your son. But I think I've developed feelings for you." At that moment, the garden seemed to go still. Even the wind stopped moving the chimes. His confession wasn't what I expected. It took my breath away. I held my cup, feeling the warmth against my palms, and tried to steady myself. In his face, I saw no arrogance, only sincerity, even vulnerability. "That's a lot to share," I murmured. "And very brave." My heart pounded, but not with fear. It was more the sense of crossing into unfamiliar territory, one where honesty and respect mattered more than anything else.
Ryan lowered his gaze. "I don't expect anything,"
he said softly. He just couldn't keep it inside anymore. For a long moment, we sat in silence. The scent of chamomile and lemon cookies wrapped around us, and I felt a tenderness rise inside me, not just for him, but for myself, for the life I had built, and for the courage it takes at any age to speak the truth. The porch felt like an island suspended in time, and we were 2 people navigating a fragile but honest moment together. I reached out, touching his hand lightly as a gesture of reassurance. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "Let's just sit here a little while, breathe. We'll figure out what this means later." He nodded, his shoulders relaxing just a bit. The tea between us had cooled, but something else had warmed. The air, the silence, the space where words no longer needed to explain everything. The next morning, the garden felt different. Rain had passed during the night, leaving the grass sparkling with drops like tiny beads of glass. As I stepped outside to collect the mail, I replayed Ryan's words over and over. They weren't brash or rehearsed. They had come from a place of honesty, and that made them impossible to ignore. I poured myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my mug. My house felt too quiet, too full of echoes. I hadn't responded to his confession beyond that moment on the porch. After the tea, we sat in a soft silence, then he stood to leave. He smiled faintly, thanked me for the cookies, and walked back down the path with that same slow, deliberate stride. I watched him go, unsure whether to call out or let him leave. Now, hours later, the weight of what had passed lingered like a fragrance I couldn't quite place. By mid-afternoon, I decided I couldn't stay inside with my thoughts. I tidied up, rearranged the books on the coffee table, and put on a light cardigan. The sky had brightened, and the scent of damp earth mixed with lilacs drifted in through the open windows. My son had moved away years ago. My husband and I had divorced long before that. Though my life was steady, it was also quiet. Perhaps that's why Ryan's presence had unsettled me so deeply. It reminded me that someone saw me as more than just a neighborly figure. At 4:40, my phone buzzed. A message from Ryan. A thank you for listening yesterday. Could we talk again if you're comfortable? I read it twice. His tone was careful, respectful, leaving the decision entirely in my hands. After a moment, I typed back, come by at 5. We can sit in the garden. When Ryan arrived, the air was warm, and the scent of rain on stone filled the air. I had set the small iron table under the old magnolia tree, a pot of peppermint tea between us this time. He looked a little less tense than the day before, but his eyes still searched mine, as if to gauge the temperature of my heart. Thank you for agreeing to see me, he said quietly. I didn't sleep much last night. I kept thinking I'd ruined everything. You didn't ruin anything, I replied, my voice softer than I expected. You were honest. That takes courage. He exhaled, nodding slightly. I just needed you to know how I felt, even if nothing comes of it. You've been kind to me, and I didn't want my feelings to turn into resentment or confusion. I stirred my tea slowly, watching the leaves spin. Ryan, I said, are very young compared to me and my life. It's at a very different stage. What you said surprised me, but it also touched me. It reminded me that I'm still seen, still present. He looked up at me, his expression open. I don't see you as just my friend's mom. I see you as a person, someone who listens, who has depth. That's rare. The sincerity in his voice left a tremor in my chest, but I also felt a wave of responsibility, wanting to protect both of us from making choices we'd regret. I value our connection, I said carefully. I don't know what it means yet, but if you'd like, we can keep talking about life. About whatever you need. Without rushing, he smiled, a little relieved. I'd like that. We sat together, sipping peppermint tea, the sun filtering through the magnolia branches in dappled light. The garden hummed with bees, and there was no urgency now, just a quiet recognition that something had shifted between us. Not a leap into something reckless, but a doorway opening into deeper understanding. As he left that evening, Ryan paused at the gate and turned back. "No, thank you," he said softly, "for not shutting me out." I stood on the porch, hands wrapped around my empty cup, watching him disappear down the street. Inside me was a strange blend of calm and anticipation, as if my life had tilted slightly toward a new horizon. I didn't know where it would lead, but I felt awake in a way I hadn't for years. The magnolia petals drifted down like pale paper, covering the path where his footsteps had been. Days passed, and Ryan's visits became a quiet rhythm in my otherwise predictable life. He never pressured, never imposed. He simply came, sometimes with a book he thought I'd like, sometimes with a story about work or a funny incident on the subway. I found myself looking forward to those afternoons, like waiting for the slow bloom of a flower. One late afternoon, I found him waiting at the gate. The sky was a wash of golden pink, and the scent of jasmine floated over the fence. His hands were in his pockets, but there was a nervous energy in his shoulders that I hadn't seen before. I realized he must have something important to share. "May I come in?" he asked. I nodded, stepping aside. He walked past the roses and magnolia tree with a measured pace, like he was bracing himself. I led him to the porch, where a small pot of chamomile tea steamed gently on the table. "I've been thinking," he began, voice hesitant. about what you said, that we don't have to rush, that we can just talk. I want to respect that." He paused, glancing at the tea, then back at me, "But I also can't ignore what I feel." I felt my chest tighten, the air thick with the weight of anticipation. "Ryan," I said softly, "the feelings aren't something to ignore, but we do need to be mindful of them. That's the tricky part. Honesty and respect together." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I know, sometimes I feel like I can't stop thinking about you. Not in a fleeting way, but persistent." I took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the tea seep into my fingers. What you're sharing shows trust. That matters more than you realize." The sun dipped lower, painting the porch in shades of amber and rose. For a long moment we sat there, letting the quiet stretch. My heart was responding in ways I hadn't expected. Tenderness, curiosity, a connection that went beyond age. Not passion in the reckless sense, but a recognition of each other, fully seen, without pretense. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "Would it be all right if I stayed a little longer, just to talk?" "Nothing more." I smiled, a soft exhale of relief. "Of course, that's exactly what I want, too." He leaned back in his chair, relaxed slightly, and began telling a funny story from work that made me laugh so fully I felt it in my belly. In that laughter, the tension dissolved, replaced by an easy intimacy. I saw him differently now, not just my son's friend, not just a young man with a crush, but as a person whose honesty had opened a door I hadn't realized I'd been standing in front of. The garden around us seemed to hold its breath, magnolia petals glowing in the late sun. Time moved differently in those moments, slower, richer, more aware. I found myself noticing every detail, the curve of his smile, the warmth in his eyes, the way the breeze played through the trees. Each observation carried a quiet joy, a sense of discovery that I hadn't felt in years. By the time he left, the sky had turned deep violet. He lingered at the gate, looking back at me with a quiet intensity. "A thank you," he said softly, "for letting me be myself with you." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the sun or the tea. "And thank you," I replied, "for letting me be myself too." As he walked down the path, I closed the gate slowly, savoring the hush that followed. The garden was quiet, but not lonely. The magnolia petals glowed faintly in the moonlight, and I realized that life has a way of surprising us. It offers moments of honesty, tenderness, and connection when we least expect them. I poured myself one last cup of tea, the steam curling in the cool evening air, and sat on the porch. For the first time in a long while, I felt fully awake, fully present, deeply grateful for Ryan's honesty, and the gentle ways it had transformed my world. The memory of those afternoons, of that rare, tender trust, would stay with me always. In the quiet, I smiled to myself. Life at 57 was far from ordinary. It was rich, unexpected, still unfolding in ways I'd never imagined. And whatever came next, I knew I would face it with an open heart, ready to embrace the honest connections that make life truly worth living.